How do your favorite consumer products measure up? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Lizzie Horvitz. Lizzie has been passionate about sustainability since she was 16 years old, living off the grid. And she later worked in supply chain and sustainability at Unilever, and then became chief operating officer at Muuse, which was a startup that aims to mitigate single-use plastics in the to-go industry. Now she is the founder of Finch. And Finch is an organization, her and her team are actually decoding sustainability in order to help consumers like you and I to make more informed buying decisions. And today we're going to talk about the 6 key factors for sustainability and scoring that, how the consumer market is changing, and what she has learned from being a startup entrepreneur in the world of sustainability. Now, before we do that, I do want to do a shout out to the team at Podcast Bookers for introducing us to Lizzie. I always love acknowledging those that support the show. So thank you to them. And of course, thank you for listening and for watching. We're excited that you're here, and we know the show is going to be very informative, I hope, and I believe that it'll be very informative for you in making those buying decisions going forward. So Lizzie, let's welcome her to the show. Lizzie, welcome to Leaders Transformation.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. I'm happy to be here.
My pleasure. And I am happy to have you here and talking about sustainability. And I love what you're doing. And I actually have downloaded the app. We're going to talk about what that app is and everything, or the extension, I guess is the right term. And really, it's fascinating to be able to get that information at your fingertips. But before we dive further into that, let's talk about sustainability. How do you define it?
It's a really good question. I define it the way that the UN defines it, which is essentially living in a way that meets your needs without compromising the needs of future generations. And so, while historically that has meant, purely from a climate change perspective, from our environmental footprint, I think it also relates to our social footprint as well. If we're using products that are using children as laborers or other sort of socially problematic issues, that's also sustainability, right? We cannot have children working in mines for generations to come. That's an unsustainable way to live. So we sort of think about it as all encompassing, just making sure that we're able to meet our needs.
So how did you become passionate about this? And I mean, living off the grid at 16, that's pretty cool. So tell us a little bit about that backstory.
Yeah, that's really how it happened. I think, this was 2004, and obviously climate change was understood, but it wasn't nearly discussed to the extent that it is today. And it was, I barely knew about it. And so I think when a lot of people are exposed to climate change for the first time, they think about droughts and wildfires and, a lot of shame. I was introduced to it in a pretty beautiful way that was this, we were surviving off of water from the rain and a wind generator and solar panels. And when you look at it from that lens, it's actually like a very beautiful way to think about the future, as opposed to this scary sort of, what are we going to do, doomsday situation.
So what I'm hearing is, yeah, it's kind of like this mindset. We talk a lot about mindset on this show. Some people come from that place of scarcity. I certainly did at one point, this place of survival, of fixing the wrongs. And then there's a shift to actually furthering the right. And it's a distinction. It's a subtle distinction, but it's a really important distinction. And I think it's important in what you're talking about, sustainability, because there is a lot of shaming. There's a lot of, you're doing things wrong, you shouldn't be doing this, and trying to kind of force through that shame new behaviors. Whereas it sounds like you're taking a little bit of a different approach to that and making it going from a positive standpoint of a brighter future.
I would say that we're almost making the opposite approach, taking the opposite approach. Because, yes, to your point, we haven't seen it be successful where people say, do you know how much, carbon it requires to create a cheeseburger, or flying to that wedding of your friends, etc. Like, nobody's ever changed their behavior because of that, I don't think. Like, that's not a way to get people to feel empowered to make decisions. And it's also not realistic, unfortunately. Like, we love those people, that 5% of the population that have decided to be vegan and never fly again. That's not most of the population, and it never will be. So what we're trying to say is, hey, living the way that you do is okay. Like you have permission, not that you need it, to have a pickup truck, right? Or to buy on Amazon Prime every once in a while. But if you're willing to make these small changes, those can make a really big difference. And so what we found is that, yeah, people aren't willing to change their diet necessarily, but are they willing to try a new toilet paper that is made with recycled paper as opposed to virgin? Sure. And so it's these small steps that can really lead up to making a really big difference. And we really integrated that into every aspect of our company. If you notice on our website, it's very bright, vibrant colors. All of our competitors have gone with sort of this dark green, like we're the problem and we need to make these changes. And we're like, everybody's cool. Let's just try to do the best we can.
I love that. And what are the factors that, when you look at determining sustainability and maybe even just talking a little bit more from a context standpoint, what Finch is, and then of course, yeah, those factors that determine.
Sure. Finch rates products based on their environmental footprint, which essentially includes these 6 different factors. The first is climate. So very simply, the carbon dioxide and other GHGs that are directly or indirectly released based on this product. Second is water. How water intensive is it to create this product and to use this product? Third is human well-being, and that's where we get into a little bit of the social aspects. It also has to do with the chemicals, et cetera. What's really interesting about human well-being is a lot of people hear that and they think, is it healthy for me as a consumer? Which absolutely, that's super important and that's something that we pay attention to. But more important than that are the chemicals that factory workers are exposed to when they're making the products. Because if you think that there's a chemical in your lotion that might be problematic, think about all those people who are making that product in very, very large quantities. And so we like to sort of take a holistic view on human well-being. The fourth is ecological. That's essentially, is it using less ecotoxic chemicals? Is it Sustainable Forestry Initiative certified, et cetera? The fifth is waste. So pretty standard. What type of packaging is it made out of? What are the options to get rid of it? Is there circular economy incorporated? And then finally is raw materials. So where do the materials come from to make this product? Is it cotton, organic cotton, et cetera? Because that has different implications. So we essentially look at these 6 different factors. We first look at the product category overall, and we weigh the factors based on the category itself, which is unique. So for sunscreen, for example, waste is not that big of an issue. Like, yes, it's made out of packaging, but no more than any other CPG company product. Chemicals are a problem, right? You don't want these chemicals seeping into your skin or your children's skin. And also when you go into the ocean, you don't want them getting in the ocean. So we would weigh chemicals more heavily than, say, ecological or waste. But then with, pillows, chemicals are not as much of an issue. It's really these raw materials, talking about cotton versus organic cotton, the water intensity, et cetera. So we weigh all of those first before even looking at the individual products. And then we use machine learning to sort of product match, take all of this data that we can get from the public domain about how these products are made, and then we rate them on a scale between 1 and 10.
So it sounds to me like, well, obviously you're using AI, but it sounds like very intensive in terms of how to, because you mentioned about even per industry, taking into consideration the use of the product, like you talked about sunscreen, how it's being used, and what are some of the unintended consequences of using that product beyond what we would naturally think. So that takes a lot of thought. So your team does this, or have you now been able to use like AI to do that, or how does that work? I'm just curious. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Sure. My team does this, and it is intensive, but it's also not as intensive as you might think. We are not a life cycle analysis company, right? So we would never know your 3rd-tier suppliers as a sunscreen company. We don't know, where your palm oil is sourced from that third party. Because that's not scalable, right? We've rated over 1 million products, and there's no way that we'd be able to individually vet all of those factors for each product. So we basically prioritize explainability over accuracy, which means that we have a reason for weighing all these certain things in a way. And then if you were to ask us, like, why was this rated higher than, why was X rated higher than Y, we're able to say it's because of these different factors. And so that is a really helpful way to sort of explain all of this. And we have 88 categories rated right now. Each new category takes our sustainability scientist about 2 to 4 days to create. So it's just a lot of meta-analysis. We take existing research out there. We're not doing firsthand research ourselves.
So I mean, it's fascinating. And I think it's great that you're doing it and there's others that are doing it, but I love the way that you're doing it, like you said, from that positive perspective. What are some of the categories that may be surprising? I mean, there's the obvious ones. There's the typical culprits everybody kind of knows about and or talks about. But what are the surprising categories that when you got into that, it's like, wow, there's a lot of these products that are just not really good for you?
That's a good question. I would say, as much as I knew that laundry detergent was problematic, it's been really interesting to look at the costs and benefits of the different packaging within laundry detergent. So the chemicals used are always like a little bit problematic. You need strong chemicals to clean your clothes. But in terms of, liquid, powder, sheets, drops, or not drops, drops is a brand, but which we love, but sort of the pods, those are all really interesting with different costs and benefits. The pods are particularly interesting because they're made out of this packaging that is technically plastic, and I cannot think of the name right now. I'll get back to you on this, but it's technically plastic, but it does not break down into microplastics. And so it's really confusing for people because they're like, okay, this is great. It's better than these bulky, big Tide detergents, but it's still plastic. So is that better? And the answer is, yeah, it is, because it's in these small amounts and it's not then ending up in your water stream.
Got it.
So I think detergent's been really interesting. The other one that we always find interesting is sort of the willingness to switch to a shampoo bar from a shampoo container, right? So some of this is just like learning and behavior change, which, as I said in the beginning, we're not sort of banking on people making these huge changes. But if we can offer a shampoo bar that's completely plastic free, that does the same thing to your hair, that's been something that, certain demographics have been more willing to switch on.
Interesting. Yeah. Shampoo bar. I've never tried it. So interesting. So what stops people from acting on sustainability?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think there's a common misconception that a lot of people just don't shop based on sustainability, right? They care about price, they care about quality, they have brand loyalty. That's actually not the case. People do care. It's just that there hasn't been an easy way for them to make decisions, right? So people are not going to take 3 to 4 days to do research on what shampoo they need to buy because they're busy, they have jobs, they have families, etc. So the thing that stops them is honestly getting so far down the rabbit hole that they don't have a good answer. And it's kind of like, oftentimes in sustainability, we love to talk about these like lose-lose situations where there are always trade-offs. No physical product is ever perfect, right? And so we see people drop off when they start getting discouraged around sort of no good option out there. And so part of Finch's goal is really providing a good option in each category, which is also unique because, like, for instance, detergents, again, as an industry, they're not great. On an absolute scale, they would not rate more than a 6 or a 7 out of 10 ever. But because we know that people need to buy detergent, we're not targeting people who are making homemade detergent in their bathtub. We always give an option for like a 9, 9.5 for every single category, because the user experience would be such a bummer to go on and be like, I need laundry detergent, everything's like a 5 or below. And so I think that historically has been the reason why people don't think about sustainability.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just thinking about some of the coming back to this idea of the examples of, like, you use a sunscreen, right? So there's some unintended consequences what are some products where we think we're doing good, but it's actually detrimental to us? So some of those, those products that we're like, oh, I'm doing such a good thing. And actually we haven't taken into consideration some of these other factors.
The reusable straw and the canvas tote are both really good examples of that. Metal straws are terrific if they are used a lot, right? So a metal straw would have to be used 100 times to sort of outweigh the plastic straw benefits from a climate standpoint. I think
Wow.
so people tend to
Why
be
is
a
that?
little bit binary on thinking about sustainability, where of course metal is better because the plastic isn't ending up in a turtle's nose, and who likes to see those pictures of turtles suffocating with plastic. While that is true, more marine life die because of climate change than of plastic debris. And so when you think of the energy it requires to make a metal straw versus a plastic straw, there's no comparison. The energy for metal is significantly more intensive. And so what we say is, if you are able, we know that there are people out there that need to use straws, so keep doing what you need to do. If you're able to not use a straw, that's the best choice. The second choice is buy a metal straw and use it religiously. Bring it everywhere. Use it in your morning latte every single day. And then, of course, it's fantastic. What you shouldn't do is buy sort of a 10-pack of metal straws where 9 of which sit in your cabinet and are never used. You would be better off getting a new plastic straw every day for over a year, if that's the case. And, same idea for reusable bags. Plastic bags are bad, brown bags are bad, of course. Anything that's single use is problematic, right? That you're using for 12 minutes and then you're disposing of. But if you happen to find yourself at the grocery store and you've forgotten your reusable bags at home in your car, the better option is always to get a plastic bag or a paper bag versus getting another reusable bag. Because again, what's probably going to happen is that reusable bag will sit at home and only be used once, whereas it really needs to be used hundreds of times before you're paying that off.
That makes sense. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
got a lot of those reusable bags that I've been given, and they're usually sitting in my trunk. So
exactly.
yeah. And I use the other bags. I use them for like garbage or different things that I've got, like litter and stuff like that. So
And that's great.
yeah.
That's a great way
Yeah.
to sort of reuse that.
Coming back to Amazon, because you mentioned about Amazon Prime earlier, and I know that you work with Amazon, and Amazon gets a big, bad rap in the area of sustainability. So talk about that relationship and how you navigate that with integrity.
Definitely. So the way that browser extensions work means that we can work with Amazon without having a formal relationship with them. So there's no money exchanged, there's no contract signed. We basically have built something where if someone happens to go on Amazon.com, Finch will show up. So that is the sort of first and foremost thing to be clear about, because of course all these big companies are problematic. We chose very consciously to partner in quotes with Amazon first, because the fact of the matter is most people shop on Amazon, right? And so where we wanted to get sort of the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak, would be through the Amazon ecosystem. We are not in the market of trying to create a new shopping experience where people are going to finch.com and shopping instead. I don't believe in our strength enough to be able to get people out of Amazon. And so we figured if people are already shopping there, a lot of them are feeling guilty about it. Let's make that experience a little bit better for them. We do have partnerships with other retailers. We work with Microsoft Bing, and that's money is exchanged there. And I think we want to stay as neutral as possible. We want to admit when companies are doing things that we don't agree with, but also understand that you need some of these behemoths to make good change. I'm a firm believer that the biggest change regarding sustainability will happen in the private sector, and so unfortunately, sort of just like boycotting them and not working with them is not an option for me, and I don't think it should be for a lot of other people.
Yeah. Now, who pays Finch? Because this is a free extension.
It's a free extension. We make money in two ways, both by selling data. So the first is that Microsoft Bing example, where when you're shopping on Bing, kind of like how you shop on Google, all these products show up and Bing will show you what the sustainable options are. So we'll say this gets a Finch score of 7 out of 10. Bing pays us a monthly fee to surface those scores. So they will send us their product descriptions, we will score them and send it back. And so that's sort of can be replicated on other retailers, where if retailers don't want to work with the extension and they just want the product to show up automatically for their consumers, we're able to do that. And then the second is we gather really fascinating insights on behaviors, behavior changes, willingness to pay, who and why are people likely to make these changes or these decisions. What's most interesting is, unlike any other source of data, we're able to see, okay, someone searched for X detergent and ended up going with Y, right? A lot of people know who that shopper is that bought Y, but they don't know that they actually ended up looking at a different product first. And so that information is really rich to go back to brands and say, hey, you're either, you're losing market share to these other guys because you have a score of a 6.5 and not a 9.5. And we can help you get there. Or if they already are doing a great job, we can say, here's how you can market better because this is what people care about.
So you just mentioned about we can help you get there. What do you do to help them get there?
So as I mentioned with the explainability, we can do a sensitivity analysis to show, in shampoo, here are all of the factors that make the biggest difference within those 6 impact areas. If you change your packaging, if you change your shipping method, etc. And we could share with these companies, like, so they're not really wasting time. Here are the things that will have the highest impact, as opposed to doing these like small low-hanging fruit projects that might change the score slightly, but really isn't where the impact is. I think to your question earlier, there's a lot of common misconceptions about the actual issues and how problematic they are, right? As I said, like marine deaths to plastic is actually not as big of an issue as the climate impact on marine life. And so the better we can explain that to brands and help them change what really matters, I think the better for everybody.
Yeah, so you're giving them the data, then they can decide what they do from there.
Exactly.
But that's that curated data and very in depth. That's cool. Now, actually, I did want to come back to this whole, we talked about Amazon, Kindle versus print book. Most people would say, Kindle is better. And because, you're not printing the book and all that, but you think about the amount of, and this is the electronic to the physical conversation, right? Is the impact of actually having to create an infrastructure to be able to have all this electronic data versus a print book, which actually rates higher.
Yeah, this is like my favorite thing to nerd out on because it's so complicated. And to your point, I think a lot of people who have the best intentions think, oh, well, electronic because you're not wasting paper, right? You're not cutting down trees. But print books are significantly better. You have to have, I think, I don't have the exact number, but at least hundreds, if not thousands of books on your Kindle to sort of pay that off. So if you're just going to have 2 or 3 books on a Kindle, like the energy, the mining required to make that is significantly worse. But the interesting caveat is Kindles are only made for reading, right? The only thing you can do on a Kindle is to read. So that's sort of the functional use, we like to say. If you have books on your iPad, that is a different story because your iPad also operates as a computer, a phone, a text, a way to text. It has all these other uses. So when you're saying, would you rather have a print book or a book on your iPad? If your iPad's already being used for all these different things, it might be better just to have it on your iPad. So those are like the really interesting distinctions that we love to think through.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking, because we're talking about from an individual standpoint, me having, let's say, Kindle or having an iPad, but then there's also the aggregate of everyone using it. but there's a scaling to that too. Yeah, I guess you could totally geek out on this. It's like the scaling of it. So now we have all these people using Kindle. So if one more person uses Kindle, is there any additional cost? But if there's a million more people, then all of that. So
Exactly.
interesting.
And it's kind of a similar thing with books too, right? Like one tree is not getting cut down for every single book that's printed. So there probably could be diminishing returns when you're buying a super popular book that's already been printed millions of times. Probably
Yeah.
not having a huge impact on the environment.
Yeah, or by used.
Exactly. By used. Yeah. I mean, libraries are fantastic. I love that they're sort of making a comeback now. Yeah.
Interesting. So you're an entrepreneur. You've been involved in some startups. Before we wrap up, I would love for you to share a little bit about that experience and even being in the sustainability industry in that space. What have been some of your biggest takeaways? Like, so if somebody's out there, they're a leader of transformation or an aspiring leader of transformation, and they're saying, I want to get into this space. I want to do something that makes a difference for the people, the planet, having a greater purpose. And they're looking at the startup world, maybe even getting investors and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to do a broad brush on that. What has been some of your biggest takeaways that you could share with them?
I think my biggest takeaway, the best piece of advice I got was my dad he always used to say to me, if you don't have time to do it right the first time, when are you going to have time to do it over? And that has served me very, very well, because I think when you're a founder of a company, there are a million fires to always be putting out. There are a million different directions to always go in. And it's really easy to say, I'm not even going to worry about accounting or a cap table or any of that like bureaucratic stuff. That has to be super, super clean all the time, because when you get to a point when you're fundraising or, people are doing their due diligence on you, like you need all of that in a really strong, positive way. And so, I've had the company that I used to work for did it in the opposite way, where we didn't deal with, a cap table or anything or accounting for years and years. And then we had to do a lot of back work. So I think one of my biggest takeaways is just like, take time to do all that stuff. It's not fun. Nobody likes doing it, but if you're able to hire an accountant and a lawyer to help you out, that's great. If not, you just got to do it yourself. I think that the other main takeaway is just that, like, it's so fun. I absolutely love every minute. And it's hard, but it's really unlike any other job in the sense that it's the opposite of monotonous, right? Every single day in the past 2.5 years has felt completely different than the day before or than any other day before. And so that's really fun, because while I'm not focused specifically on, the climate change impact in a certain industry, I'm learning about investors and accountants and marketing and CACs and all these different things that I probably would have never learned about had I not gone down this entrepreneurship route. And so it's just really fun to be able to understand all of this and to keep learning.
So and you talk about possibly having like an accountant or a lawyer or somebody help you with this, and if you can't, you got to do yourself. What would you recommend that people not try to do on their own as a founder?
Oh, that's a really good question. Honestly, I would say the legal stuff. Like, unless you're a lawyer, you got to find a way to either pay them in equity or pay them in some way to just do it right, because we've already had issues with, employment contracts, business contracts. Like, you need someone to be able to read that through and sort of tell you everything there is to think about. And as someone who's not a lawyer, I just would have never been able to do that myself. And unfortunately, hopefully you could tell by this call, I'm a very sort of like optimistic, want to see the best in people type of person. But you kind of end up shooting yourself in the foot if you trust too much and you think that everything's going to work out. You really need to like cross all your T's and dot your I's. So the legal part is important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And, it's not even just the contract initially, it's then what happens if there's an issue, who actually looks at that. And
Exactly.
yeah, it's really good. So just one more question as it comes to, being an entrepreneur. So what has been that balance? So you mentioned about getting things done, and because I hear this a lot with people, right? They want to get out there, they want to make things happen. You're saying take time to do things right. And yet there's this urgency to be first to market, to be ahead of the curve and not be too slow, right? So how do you balance that as an entrepreneur of the things that are doing the right things, but also being first to market and or leading in your industry and, getting the traction you need in a timely manner to keep your investors happy and all balancing all of that? How do you do that?
I don't know if I figured it out. It's such a good question. I always err on the side of um, taking time to do it right, but that ends at a certain point, right? Reid Hoffman, who's notorious, he started LinkedIn and is an amazing investor. He has a quote that says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you launch too late. Meaning, like, you just got to get something out there and keep iterating and trying. I think the way to manage that is to just be hyper focused, right? We are trying to do one thing beautifully. And if you're able to do that and have a separate folder and file that are all, and we've had this for 2.5 years of sort of like the dreams, right? Of eventually we're going to be able to do this and X, Y, and Z and all these different things. Be able to dream in that way off hours, and write that down somewhere so you don't forget it. But focus on what you're really trying to accomplish in real time, so that you don't get distracted by these other things. And then I think you should be able to do it all.
Yeah, well said. Well, Lizzie, thank you so much for being here. And I know there's so much more to talk about, but we really appreciate you just even taking a few minutes and sharing a little bit about your experience and what you guys are doing. How do they get this Chrome? I think it's a Chrome extension exclusively, or is it? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
soon there will be an app, so stand by for that, a mobile app.
I was being prophetic on that.
Exactly, you knew.
In the beginning.
You can check us out at choosefinch.com and download our extension directly through that. And then, I love hearing from users. I love getting feedback. And so feel free to email me at hey@choosefinch.com. And I'd love to hear from anybody on how we're doing.
I love it. Lizzie, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Love the email address, by the way. That's fun. And
so
we appreciate also our, everyone who's listening and viewing. Thank you for tuning in. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some insights. I got to answer some questions or ask some questions for Lizzie to answer for me that I had for myself, my own buying habits. And I'm sure maybe for you that there's some additional questions that have come up. Go to choosefinch.com and get the extension, ask the questions, reach out to Lizzie and get those questions answered so that you can make a better informed decision and feel good about the decisions you make, not just because you heard it from someone else or from the media that they said this is good and this is bad, but really thinking it through is what I'm hearing through this conversation. It's like really thinking through the impact of our decisions and even the unintended consequences, and being able to take that into consideration, I think is really, really important. I always say that leaders of transformation take action. So take action today on doing something. The next time you go on Amazon, the next time you go and shop for something online, use this extension to be able to rate your product and even just trying some different, going in some different, industries and categories to be able to see how they rate it, I think will be helpful. The more educated we get, I think the better it is for everyone and the better it is for the planet. So I encourage you that. We'd love to hear your story. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com and you can reach out to us there. Of course, you can also find us on social media as well. And we'd love to hear your stories. And if you like this episode or it was eye-opening to you and you're like, wow, this is so cool, I'd love you to share it with others because that helps us to reach your friends and create a wider impact in the world. And so we appreciate you doing that. And and join us the next week for another amazing episode with guests that are transforming the world. We'd love to have you join us again. And we appreciate you. Have a great day.